Welcome back to the OC story. This is part 28, and if you like happy endings, you might want to finish listening to this story here. Alright, with that ominous warning out of the way, let's dive back in. Darrow was fine. Of course he was. He healed up faster than he usually would. This told them quite a lot without any words. Obviously, he realised, and his father later confirmed, it was something to do with that celestial blood. He wasn't immortal. He could die. He could be killed. He could bleed out like a mortal. But it would take far longer, and the injuries he'd sustained from the fight with Maximus were nowhere near enough to finish him off. The appearance of the old foe had told them something, though. 3 years had passed. 3 years where Maximus had been searching for the assassin. That meant the world had moved on without them. And so they started to think more and more, and they thought about returning to the world. They decided, though, that 3 years might not be enough. People might still be searching for one or all of them. Maybe they should take a peek and just check. It was decided very quickly, and predominantly by Darrow himself, that the assassin would not go peeking. He had wings, he was nowhere near inconspicuous. So, Prince Erasmus and Tinny decided they would go. They would report back to Darrow on what they had found out, and just take a tiny, tiny peek into the world to see what was going on. So, a few days later, they went. The 3 of them strolled right to the very edge of the forest, and Darrow set up a small camp for himself and went hunting for some food, while the others went down the long, winding paths towards civilization. They took weapons and kisses from Darrow with them, and promised to be careful and as unseen as possible. They would head for taverns, listen out for gossip, and mostly look for wanted posters. When they returned, it was with a luggage load of information, some encouraging, some intriguing. The world had indeed rolled on without them, but there were still wanted posters with Prince Erasmus's face on. He was still wanted for treason, but they were blowing down in the wind now. They were old and faded. There weren't new ones. Some places didn't have any at all, and it seemed as though, slowly, people were either giving up or maybe starting to forget. The missing princess had no posters up looking for her at all. The biggest thing they discovered, though, was that the country of Drevdalania itself was changing. The monarchy was slowly collapsing. Belgoth, their closest neighbour, had started to sever ties. Their prince, Erasmus of Drevdalania, was of course blamed for the murder of a king, attempted assassination of 2 princes, and now potentially kidnapping another princess. The royals decided to blame all of it on him, to add pressure to the hunt for Erasmus. But this, as it turned out, had slightly backfired. Drevdalania was now seen as a country that bred crazed royals who were untrustworthy and uncontrollable. So, the marriage would have been off even if they did find Princess Augustine. The power that Drevdalania once had, and its allegiances with its allies, was slowly disintegrating. The residents had been in uproar for several months, and now a lot of people were leaving. The country was emptying slowly, and others who hadn't left yet were definitely talking about it. Tinny was of course worried for her mother, her brother, and Cholly the Jester. She wonders if she should go back, but they all decide it wouldn't help. And also, honestly, deep in her heart, she didn't want to go back. Not at all. There was not a single part of her that wanted to be the princess ever again. Erasmus understood this, and he felt exactly the same about returning to royal life. The assassin chuckled as the other 2 talked. He stoked the fire, stirring the pot for their dinner, and looked up and said, "How the fuck did I end up with 2 royals in my little family?" This made the other 2 smile, and Tinny seemed cheered for the moment. Her 2 uncles did start to speak more after Tinny had gone to bed. As they headed back to their camp and the nights wore on, they spoke about Tinny, about her life, about what they could do for her. They certainly didn't want to return to the world just yet, not while everything was in the state that it was, but maybe another couple of years. They could keep checking in, see how the world was doing, see what was happening, and possibly, once everything had calmed down, once they were certain they wouldn't be recognised, once they were certain that everything could be as alright as it possibly could be, they could take her back. Not to the palace life, no, of course not, but to another type of life. They could build something new, something just for the three of them. But more importantly, as Erasmus and Darrow both agreed while they were laying in bed together deep in the night time, Tinny deserved other people. They loved her. They loved her, of course they did. She was their own child at this point, a daughter to them both. But she deserved friends. She deserved more than just this. They had promised her mother and her father that they would do everything they could to give her the best life possible, and hiding out in the woods was certainly not the best life possible. She was safe, of course she was, but safe wasn't always the best life. She could go to school. She could have friends. That was the point they always kept coming back to. The girl deserved friends. She could study a trade. She could go to university or college. She could do anything. She could travel. Just something. Anything beyond this forest. It was beautiful, and they loved the little home they had made. And of course they could return to it if they wanted to, but they wanted to give her the option. She deserved that much. She was bright, she was clever, she was funny, she was charming. She would make friends immediately, and she deserved that. Hell, she might even find a partner. This, as Erasmus said it, made Darrow immediately backtrack. He couldn't possibly imagine that just yet, not for their little girl. But they both agreed. It was something she deserved, if it was something she wanted, and she wasn't going to find it hiding out in the forest with them. Alright then, so another couple of years. We'll keep checking in, see how the world's doing, and in a couple of years. Yeah? Blue eyes looked across into dark ones, and Erasmus nodded. Yes. Another couple of years, I think. She will still have plenty of her life ahead of her, still be just a teenager, just a girl. Enough that she can still learn, still grow, but she'll have been safe. And then it's up to her, I suppose. We'll ask her, shall we, what she wants to do? Yes, of course. The decision should ultimately be hers. I could hide out in the trees with you forever, but it's up to her. It's her life. I think she'll say yes. I do too. But we should still ask, right? Yes, we should still ask. Tomorrow. Yeah, alright. We'll ask her tomorrow. So, the next day, after gathering some berries and cooking some breakfast, they all sat down, and the place where most of their deepest conversations happened, around their fire pit, was the place where they brought it up. They asked Tinny straight out, explaining their thoughts, another couple of years of waiting, checking in on the world, and then going back, building a new life, sending her to school, giving her friends, everything she could possibly want, but only if she did want it. They posed this to her, and Tinny thought about it. She chewed her mouthful of berries thoughtfully, looking all around them at their beautiful camp, and then back to her two uncles. And then she smiled. Yes, I think I'd like to go back to the world. Only if it's safe for all of us, though. If it's not safe for even one of us, then we don't. We wait. All right? Eri and Darrow looked at each other, nodded, and then said, Yes, of course, Tinny. Anything you want, promise. Tinny nodded. All right then. So we'll keep an eye on the world, and we'll decide when to go back. This is quite exciting. What are we going to do? Where would we live? That conversation quickly devolved into, what if we found an abandoned castle and turned it into a big, massive house, and then... And eventually they stopped talking about it because it got a little bit too ridiculous. But Tinny could still dream in the back of her mind. Giant castles, filled with friends and family and everyone she could possibly meet and love. The idea stuck and remained in the back of her head. A giant castle, full of life, nothing like the palace she used to live in. The trouble with this enchanted forest was that you never could quite tell how time was wearing on the outside. It wasn't like 1 month inside always equated to half a year outside. Sometimes they would peek, check on the date, and mere days had passed when it had been weeks for them. But other times, a few days had passed in the forest, and Tinny and Eri would sneak out and check the date, and they'd find that nearly half a year had gone by. The forest smugly gave them no indication whatsoever what the time was like outside. They kind of loved the forest for that, though. It was its own cheeky, quirky little character. They'd grown to love and trust it in all the now years they'd spent living there. Drevdelania did continue to empty. Not completely. People were still able to live there. They could still grow their crops, go to school, live their normal lives. But the monarchy was fractured, no longer as powerful. Government officials rose up and slowly took over deciding what was happening in the country. People elected them, and the whole system just changed a little. It was never quite sturdy and stable, and the monarchy did roughly still exist. But as their peaking continued and it wore in towards 5 years having rolled by, whispers died down, and no one even thought about the missing princess or the wanted prince anymore. As a part of their peaking plan, they'd started to journey and adventure closer to the outskirts of the forest. Occasionally they would meet bands of adventurers or hunters coming in, and this was something they used to their advantage. Darrow kept to the shadows and out of the way, lest rumours of an angel living in the forest took off and went all over the country. But the other two spoke often to the travellers. They learned the dates sometimes, and got the news without having to venture out all the way towards the closest village. One such day, while they were exploring the outskirts of the forest, they discovered a little stream and followed it. It wound its way through some rocks and boulders and came out into a clearing. It turned into a massive pool, with rocks and an overspill into a tiny little waterfall that trickled off down into a valley below. It was beautiful, fairly secluded, and, most importantly, it looked like it had paths going up to it from the outskirts of the forest. People clearly used it, and this they decided was good. They could dive in, swim and play, but also possibly meet people. And that was exactly what happened. It was a few weeks later. The three of them had journeyed in the summer sunshine all the way to this beautiful pool, and Tinny was practicing diving off the rocks with instruction from Darrow and Erasmus. Darrow, after a lot of practice, had discovered he could still swim with the wings if he folded them tight shut behind him and paid close attention. The trouble was that when they got wet, it took forever to get them dry, and this, as Tinny loved pointing out, made him look like a drowned angel rat. Erasmus giggled, and Darrow did too. So they were lounging by the edge of the rock pool, watching Tinny practicing diving and jumping off. Eventually, the diving stopped and it turned into who could make the biggest splash. Darrow, it turned out, was the one who could, spreading his wings as far as he possibly could, holding onto his nose and dive-bombing into the water. So much water had cascaded over the other two that Erasmus was half certain they would empty the pool soon. As Darrow came up, spouting water from his mouth and laughing at the other two, they heard voices. Laughter, shouts, chatter. They all turned in the water and looked. And there, coming up one of the path trails from outside of the forest, was a group of teenagers. Maybe 4 or 5, they couldn't quite tell from this distance. They were holding towels and baskets of food, giggling, laughing and chatting. They set down their wares on the side of the pool and all dived in. Naturally, the assassin headed further towards their end of the pool, ducking out of the way and making sure his wings were completely hidden under the water. Erasmus leaned in beside him, carefully watching, and Tinny sat next to the rocks watching as well. After a little while, they realised they weren't going to get spotted. They were positioned just right, out of sight behind some of the rocks on the closest rock pool. Tinny continued to watch and listen in. "I bet if we listen we can hear about things happening in the world," she said. But Eri glanced at Darrow, who nodded and squeezed his leg under the water. Erasmus turned back to Tinny and said, "Why don't you go over and speak to them? If they're not friendly, you can come straight on back." I suppose I could." "Go on, Tinny. They'll love you. And if they're really not nice to you, give me the signal and tell him your guardian angel will come and fuck 'em up." That did make Tinny laugh. "All right then. Wish me luck." And she set off, swimming through the water, to go and meet, hopefully, some new friends. Erasmus and Darrow watched her go with glad eyes. She immediately did make friends, as they knew she would. She was joining in, laughing and joking, and they were all quickly dive-bombing in off the side, teaching her new swimming tricks and how to float on her back. She looked peaceful, happy and contented, in a way that they just couldn't provide. It wasn't sad. It was happy, but there was a niggling feeling inside of both of them. Darrow turned to Erasmus. "Do you reckon it's time?" "I do. The world has moved on enough. We are practically forgotten. We can go back as anyone we like, make a new life, and just look at her. She's going to do so well. I wonder what she's going to be." "Something amazing, I expect." "Yeah. I reckon she'll adventure, you know. Go loads of different places, see loads of different stuff. She's going to see more than either of us ever could. She's going to learn more than either of us ever could." "That's kind of cool, isn't it?" "It's very cool, yes. I'm so proud of her, and she's barely even begun." "Yeah, it's mad this, isn't it? Never thought I'd do the parenting thing." "Me neither. I never thought I'd even live this long." "Yeah, me neither." "I'm glad that I did."
"I'm glad you did too."
"I'm glad you did too."
"What are you going to do then, when we get out? We need to earn money somehow. What do you reckon? You going to bake stuff?"
"I think so. I shall have to apprentice first, I imagine. I should like that, though. To learn things, learn all the new techniques. I shall find a bakery that will take me on. I shall learn everything that I can, and then perhaps one day open my own. Just a little one. Doesn't need to be anything fancy. Doesn't need to earn me millions. Just to bake for people to enjoy. Anything from bread to scones to..."
"Little cupcakes with yellow icing?"
"Yes, I should love that very much." "What will you do, Darrow?"
"Well, that's kind of the problem, ain't it? Can't exactly criminal shit no more. One, what if they recognise me? Two, well..." Darrow glanced at his wings under the water. "Hardly subtle no more, am I?"
"I don't know. You could play the violin, if we could find you one. You could earn money from that. People pay a great deal for good musicians."
"Yeah, I guess.
"But I don't know, I kind of want to be out the way, at least for a little while. Doing something where I'm working with my hands, you know, building something, but I don't want no one to see me. Not for a while." "Perhaps you could craft weapons. Didn't you speak of that many years ago now?"
"I did. How do you remember that?"
"How could I not? We may not all have your celestial memory bank, but you said it and it was important. Of course I remember."
"I reckon I will. I'll try, at least. I'll have to learn. It'll be hard. But, yeah, I could make stuff. I really want to make something, you know? Something out of nothing, something real, something that lasts. I've used enough shitty blades in my time. I know how not to do it. I know what you don't want. I know what balance it should be. I know how I want it to feel in my hand. I would know what someone else wanted if they'd tell me. I could, I don't know, make custom stuff, I guess. I need to learn how to do it first, but that'll be quite fun. Yeah, that's what I'll do."
"You could learn that yourself as well," Erasmus suggested. "We could get you books on it, you could learn. There will be instructions. We could build you a forge in our back garden. You wouldn't have to go and speak with anyone you didn't want to. No one would have to see you if you didn't want them to." Darrow lay back on the edge of the pool with Eri, and they dozed in the sunlight. They listened to Tinny's laugh and chatter on the other side of the pool, and he held on tight to the prince's hand. Then a memory flickered before his vision. A new one he hadn't seen before. Simple, warm, branches in evening starlight. One tree was strong and tall, wound branches heavy, with long, thin leaves. It was a cedar tree. Darrow blinked and turned his head to look at Erasmus as the memory cleared from his vision. Erasmus was dozing, half draped in his arms, and the assassin knew then something he must do. That night, when they went back to their own camp, Tinny was buzzing, ablaze, excited. She'd made brand new friends, and they all seemed to really love her. She told them her name was Tinny, and it hadn't aroused any suspicion. None of them had recognised her at all from any wanted posters. She'd casually asked questions about the world and the monarchy and things like this, claiming she was from another country and they'd been travelling for ages. And, well, things were pretty much the same. The monarchy slowly dissolving, others rising into power in their place. The country was emptier, but not empty. People were just pottering around their lives. No one had recognised her, and nobody was looking for Prince Erasmus anymore. Darrow was excited too. The others could tell. He had thought more and more about the idea of learning how to forge and craft weapons, and he was sincerely excited by the idea. Erasmus was excited as well, of course, at the idea of learning how to bake things properly, and they all spoke of their ideas and their plans and their dreams. Tinny couldn't decide if she was excited to go to school or not, but she certainly was excited to learn things, and to hang out with new people and make new friends. And then one day I'll go on my own adventures and I'll find a massive castle and I'll move everyone I love into it and all of my friends and we can all live there together in this huge, massive, impressive castle. Tinny was grinning as she finished her dinner. The other two grinned as well. They couldn't help it around Tinny. Her smile was infectious. Her bubbly enthusiasm was just a joy. This excitement stayed with them as, over the next week or so, they slowly dismantled their camp and made preparations to head to the nearest civilization and look for a place to live. Their last day in the forest was the busiest. They packed all of their belongings ready to set off the next morning. Their bedrolls were ready. They had gathered as much food as they could carry, enough for the journey and to last them once they got out of the forest as well. But then Darrow disappeared for a little while. Tinny bounded over to Erasmus and started talking to him more about her idea for a castle, wondering if it would come with a moat or if she'd have to dig it herself. Erasmus knew that she was distracting him, but couldn't work out why. Darrow returned later, and they all had dinner together. And then he disappeared again. Erasmus watched him walk away into the forest, saying something about gathering some more berries. Eri looked down at the massive bag of berries they had already gathered, plenty for the journey, and more besides. And then, as he looked back up, he saw the assassin and his wings disappearing into the dark of the night. Tinny was nudging up, sitting next to him. Her elbow dug into his ribs as she grinned at him. Uncle Eri, will you come for a walk with me? I want to look around the whole place just one last time before we go. Can we? Erasmus smiled back at her. Of course. Do you want to leave now? Shall we call for Darrow? No, just you and me. Come on, let's go. Slightly perplexed, but happy to go, Erasmus got up and took Tinny's hand as she led him in the direction she wanted to go. Tinny waltzed on ahead, holding tight to Darrow's hand. They walked beyond the outskirts of their camp, past the bushes where they gathered most of their berries, past the trees that bore the sweetest apples, and through towards a clearing where they would lie to watch the night stars above them. As they arrived in the clearing, the place was buzzing and humming with fireflies, and a tall tree with long leaves stood gently swaying in the corner. Erasmus looked around and saw Darrow standing there, right at the centre. He smiled gently to Tinny, who waved enthusiastically at him, before dropping her Uncle Eri's hand and shoving him towards the assassin. I'll just be over here, totally not watching or anything. And then she darted away into the trees and out of sight. Erasmus looked after her, blinking, confused, and then turned back to Darrow. Darrow raised a hand, holding it towards the prince, and he walked through the long grass towards the assassin, under a blanket of stars in the evening sky. As he reached the man, he took Darrow's hand and asked, My love, what is all this? Darrow was looking almost nervous.
bright blue eyes were staring at Erasmus with such intensity the prince felt he almost may fall back. He smiled encouragingly. "What is it, my love?" And then the assassin spoke. "Eri, I never dreamed I could be as lucky as I am right now. I never even dared hope, never thought any of this could be possible. I never even let myself dream about it. I never thought it could happen. And then I met you. And then I met you again. And I never wanted you out of my life from that minute on. And I'm so glad I've got you. Eri, I'm so in love with you. You're my heartbeat. You're my cedar leaf, Eri. And I want to start this new bit of our life. Our new life, really. I want to start better, different. Eri." The assassin dropped to one knee. "Eri, would you marry me?" There was a long, gentle beat of silence in the summer breeze. The stars twinkled high overhead. The leaves of the trees rustled all around them, and dark eyes looked down into bright blue ones. "Of course I will marry you, Darrow." Of course, Erasmus said, "yes." Darrow rose to his feet at once, embraced the prince and kissed him hard under the starlit sky. Tinny whooped and cheered and ran out to hug into both of them from her hiding place in the corner. And then, the next morning, they set off, the three of them. They left the enchanted forest behind, and they set off for a brand new life in this brand new world. As I warned you at the beginning of this story, if you like happy endings, this might be where you want to leave it. I have some fun facts about the rest of the story though, so please hang around to listen to that, but please bear in mind if you're not into anything other than a happy ending, you might want to leave it here. But here is some fun information for you. So I'm going to do one more part, it might be two, but probably one more part of this story here on YouTube, and that will end it at the place where I have been intending to end this story for, how long have we been doing this now? 28 weeks? So probably for, I want to say 15 to 20 weeks. I had an idea. I didn't know what else was going to happen in the story because you guys were voting, but I had an idea, and yeah, the things you guys have been voting for has been allowing it to happen, so I've been working towards this idea. So next week's episode is going to be the quote-unquote last episode, here on YouTube at least, and it's going to have the ending that I originally intended to be the ending of this story. But, in a fun twist of fate, there is also more to this story, which has evolved over time as well. So, as you guys know, I'm writing this down into a full book, and hopefully an audiobook as well, and in that, we are going to have more of the story. I will not give you any spoilers about that, but what I will say is that it will come to a natural conclusion, whether it is here and you want to leave it on a happy note, whether it is after the end of the next episode, that is also a conclusion, or you can read the book as well or listen to the audiobook whenever that happens, and there will be more to the story as well. And if you guys want to guess what on earth I'm talking about in the comments, please feel free to do so. Thank you for engaging with this story. If this is the last place where you listen to it, then thank you very much. Also, please buy the book if it ever ends up being published. I promise you can just stop at this point and you can never read the other half of it. And if you are happy to continue listening to what might end up being a bit of a sad story, then please join in next week. Any of your thoughts, theories, opinions, anything like that, chuck them down into the comments below. Because I know what's happening in the next episode, as it was the ending I had planned for a little while, depending on how we got there, I'm not going to make you guys vote for a specific thing. Instead, I'm going to say just, what do you think? Would you happily leave it on a sort of happy ending note? Would you rather follow it through a little bit more and see what happens even if it's not that happy? There are a few plot threads you might remember that have not been resolved yet. So let me know what you guys prefer, and if you prefer a happy ending, maybe leave it on this video. And also, are you excited for this hypothetical book that... No, it's not hypothetical. I'm writing it, it's happening. I might end up having to self-publish and whatever, because I don't know if anyone will ever pick it up, but it will happen. And it's called Consecrated Blood at the moment. That's the working title. So yeah, let me know what you think, and thank you for engaging with this series. And I have decided that the next thing we will do after this, because I still love doing storytelling, is I will probably keep Fridays as a sort of OC storytelling thing, and I might do a few sort of shorter ones. I might go back to a few of my other videos where I created sort of D&D and fantasy worlds and build on them a little bit. So let me know if you've got any requests or suggestions in the comments down below, and also please don't let me forget that I really need to start doing Twitch. Anyway, all right, thank you for engaging with this story. I will see you very, very soon. Bye bye.